everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to talk about the three eclipses. The three eclipses that everybody's thinking about. The one that already happened in 2017, the two that are upcoming, one this year on October 14th and one coming up on April 8th of 2024 next year. And I've done a number of videos about this, mostly focusing on the two main eclipses because they go over major church sites. And then the one coming up in October, I think less people are really focusing on this one. But it goes through Utah, which is really interesting, and it also goes through Corpus Christi, Texas, and Corpus Christi means body of Christ. So that's really interesting. But I got an email from sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm guessing it's Sheila, but it could be Shayla Fisher. And she sent me this email. And a lot's already been said about like how these two eclipses make an X over America, and they've likened it to Hebrew, a Hebrew letter. I can't remember which one. We'll look at it in a minute. But this email has to do with the letter Aleph, and that is a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Now, if you know the Hebrew script, the modern block Hebrew script, you might be like, well, that's not an Aleph. Well, we're gonna talk about that. I don't know how much you guys know about Hebrew. I'm obviously not an expert at all, but I do know some. And we're going to talk about the implications of this. And ultimately, to kind of sum it up, I think that this has a few different meanings, one of which could be that our language has been corrupted. And when I say that, I'm talking about how in the culture wars going on right now, there's a big fight over words and controlling the narrative and using words and phrases essentially to brainwash you. You know, things like human-caused climate change and you need to call this person a he or a her. You have to use the proper pronouns and the corruption of language. You know, for all I know, when a society or a civilization reaches its end, its apex, and when it's ready to fall, maybe that's one of the final things that really happens is just the language gets corrupted in the way that we're seeing today. I can't say that for sure. Maybe some of you could chime in with your thoughts about that. But we're going to be talking about Hebrew. We're going to be talking about the pure Adamic language. We're going to talk about the Hebrew script and just a number of different things. It's really interesting, the implications of this big Aleph that's going to be showing up over the United States. So before we do that, quick update on the Flood the Earth Challenge. 6,115 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. We have 616 people that have joined. 55 people reporting reports or reporting missionaries meeting with their people that they gave the Book of Mormon to, and 19 baptisms. I want to remind everybody the channel goal is to share 10 copies of the Book of Mormon. 10. It doesn't matter how you do it. The easiest way is the Gospel Library app. Go to Scriptures at the top. You'll see a button for sharing the Book of Mormon app, and then text it or email it or however you want to send it. So try to at least get to 10. Some of you have gone way beyond 10. Here you have Alessandra Reynolds with 32, Allison and Norm Craig with 51, and others that have gotten up into the hundreds. Well, there's been like a couple that have. So see if you can get to 10. That's the ideal, and that's the channel goal. All right, so let me read this email from Sheila or Shayla. I'm very sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Ever since I learned Spanish, everything has been messed up for me in English, and I haven't been able to recover, like when I learned Spanish for my mission. Okay, on October 14th, 2023, an annular solar eclipse will cross the United States from Oregon to Texas. If you overlay the path of that annular solar eclipse on top of the paths of the Great American Eclipse of 2017 and the Great American Eclipse of 2024, you'll see that those three eclipses actually combine to create a giant Aleph over America. And here it is. And it does indeed look like the letter Aleph. All right. The 2017 eclipse went over the Kansas City area, and for the 1 millionth time, it had to take this specific path. It could not vary by even just like a couple miles, or else the path of totality would not have covered Independence, Missouri, which is the site of the New Jerusalem, the center place. Far west is kind of solidly in the middle, and then Adamondiaman is at the upper extreme of the path of totality. It had to take this path. And then the upcoming eclipse in 2024, likewise, is going over Palmyra, New York, where God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared. It's going over Kirtland, Ohio, which is within the Cleveland, Ohio metro area, which again is a place where Christ appeared along with other prophets, and it was the first temple of this dispensation. So these are very, very LDS related eclipses in my mind because of those facts. And then to top it off, the one coming up in just a couple months in October is going to go over the state of Utah. All right. And then later it says the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The Aleph in Hebrew has a numerical value of 1 because in Judaism they look at letters not just as like letters of the alphabet for writing and speaking. They look at them as numbers, like they're a vessel that can contain two values, a letter and a number, or a sound and a number, however you want to think of it. The Aleph is also representative of God and the oneness of God, the one true God. This, of course, is according to Judaism. And I'm sure that Shayla or Sheila probably copied and pasted this. I'm not sure, but it sounds like this is probably something that was copied from some other place. The Aleph is also made of 3 lines. Also the number of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The number 3 biblically represents divine wholeness, completeness, and perfection. I'm not sure who that would be according to as far as like 3 is concerned. We know that 7 and 10 are considered wholeness, completeness, perfection. I'm not so sure about 3. That might be a way that some other Christians look at it, so I can't speak to that. I haven't seen any church literature that's backed up that idea, but I think generally we do see 3 as a important number as well. I'm just not so sure it's in that case, wholeness, completeness, and perfection, but who am I to say? I don't know. I just haven't seen anything church-wise that's talked about that. Okay, so here's a better picture of it. Before we go into Aleph and the Adamic language and the corruption of language and all that stuff, I think we would do well to go back to 2017 and recognize what kind of year that was. So let's go to my second coming timeline and let's just kind of quickly review the events of 2017. It was a very interesting year. Now, the first thing with 2017 is that the Jewish year 5777 was already going on. Okay, so September or October of 2016 began the Hebrew year 5777. And then it would have ended, if you can see it right here, September of 2017 on the 21st, because on that day was Rosh Hashanah, which is when the Jews change their date. It's one of their New Years. So for the majority of 2017 was 777. It was 5777. And I recall having seen that was special to the Jews, and it's interesting that on our Gregorian calendar we also had a 7 within our year number. And in fact, it was the number 17. And it's been a while since I've talked very much about 17, but talking about completion and perfection, there's 2 numbers that are generally viewed that way. The first one is 7 because that's the number of creation. That's when it was after 7 periods that God completed his work, and that completed a cycle. And then once you reach the number 8, that begins a new cycle. So 8 is kind of symbolic of a new beginning. we've talked about how President Nelson is the 17th prophet of this dispensation, which, does that mean something? Does that mean, okay, for this dispensation, we've reached completion and perfection, like everything that we're going to do this dispensation before the second coming? I don't know, but I've done a bunch of things about 17. So on the Gregorian calendar, 2017. On the Hebrew calendar, 5777. Okay, to start things off. There were California floods in 2017, pretty sizable, caused $1.55 billion in damages. Trump and Pence took office that year on January 20th. And I know some people scoff at this, but it's interesting that his name is Trump, because that brings to mind the image of a trumpet. And it's interesting that Pence's name is Pence, because when you put them together, it's like trumpets. Some people think that that's just silly, but it really isn't, because if these two names combined, if that puts that image into your mind of a trumpet, then it's not silly. The mission accomplished. People are thinking about trumpets. And Trump was a president unlike any other that we've ever seen. Ever. Ever. Something really weird was going on with that. So we have Trump that came into office. Then August 21st, we had the Great American Eclipse. That's the one that we're talking about. We had the Revelation 12 sign. This is not like an official thing, but this is something that a lot of Christians were looking at. They were looking at the constellation Virgo, and they were comparing what's said in Revelation chapter 12, talking about the woman giving birth to the child and then fleeing into the wilderness. So the day that they say that this essentially occurred, it happened during the October 2017 General Conference General Women's Session. So that's pretty interesting. In Revelation 12, the woman represents the church at the time of Christ, and giving birth to the child is giving birth to the kingdom, right? And it had to flee away, and we had a great apostasy, so the church fled into the wilderness, so to speak, and that's mostly referring to priesthood keys that were removed from the earth. And in the Doctrine and Covenants, you read all the time about the church coming out of obscurity and coming out of the wilderness, which harkens back to Revelation 12. So I don't know what exactly this meant, but it could just be that this dispensation is coming to an end, And the kingdom, my best understanding is that the woman represents the church, so that would be like the ecclesiastical kingdom, and the child would be the political kingdom. Obviously, the Lord knew how things were going to go, that the political kingdom was not going to be set up at the time of Christ, but the beginnings of it were. And the political kingdom will take effect, we know, at the second coming and into the millennium. So it could be a sign that, hey, the kingdom, the political kingdom of God, it's coming. Because what also was associated with this event is he had Jupiter that went into the constellation Virgo, and it was there for 9 months, and then it left, and it was, quote unquote, born, so to speak. So it was a very symbolic event that occurred. Just a few weeks later, in October on the 19th, Oumuamua was discovered. This was a very strange object. They think it was a meteor that came from interstellar space, which means outside of our solar system, but it was very strangely shaped, and it came into the solar system from a very interesting constellation. I'm not going to go over that right now, but I've done a few videos about Oumuamua, so look it up. In fact, you know what? I'll just really quick so I don't forget it. I will look this up, and then I will put this in. I'll put this in the. I gotta zoom out. There it is, the hourglass or the magnifying glass. Oh my gosh. Oumuamua. I'll put the videos I've done about it. I'll put the link for it in the description below. I've done a few of them, so and they're definitely worth watching. I'll even do this one from 17 to 18. It's interesting that that shows up. Okay, so excuse me. Back to the timeline. So this was very interesting, and I feel like this was a sign. The way that it acted, the way that it was shaped, and how it left everyone with a mystery essentially. Scientists now think that they know what was going on, but whatever the case, again, the constellation it came from and the constellation it went to made it seem to me like it was like the beginning of possibly the sign of the Son of Man, like a forerunner, a messenger. That's literally what Oumuamua means in Hawaiian, is a messenger or scout, first in advance of. So it's a very interesting name. On December 6th, the United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And then it was the next year that they actually moved the embassy there. And I guess we need to go a little bit into the next year because President Thomas S. Monson passed away on the 2nd of January. So essentially, the year 2017 was the last full year of President Monson's presidency. And once that year ended, and 2 days later, it initiated President Nelson's time as president of the church. So, very interesting things going on that year. A lot of very interesting signs for those that are watching. Now, let's get into. Let's see. Let's get into the Hebrew. Before I do that, just as a reminder, I'm partnered with Israel 365. They sent me this book, 75 Hebrew Words, which I really enjoy this book very much. And I like having a physical copy of it where I can look at the Hebrew alphabet, which is in the first part of the book. And if you go to the description, okay, so here's the video, you go down. If you're on a phone, you have to click on the description, then it'll drop this whole thing down. If you go down here, past charities, you can get this book and use code Christian for $10 off, okay? And then just use this link right here. You can also donate to these charities, also run by Israel 365. One for Meir Tamari, a 32-year-old husband and father of two. Oh, I thought he had three. Okay, the father of two, ages 1 and 2.5. He was murdered on his way home in the heartland of Israel by a terrorist. It was a terrorist attack. So they're raising money to support his widow and family. There's also this charity, planting of trees in Israel, bringing the land back to life, and then help Ukrainian orphans that are in Israel. They're because of the war, so they're in Israel and being taken care of there. You can also do arts. I have a bunch of different things, but you can check these out. But for this book, $10 off if you use that code Christian. Okay. All right. So let's talk about languages now. Now, I did a video a while ago where I was exploring basically what language we're going to be speaking in the Millennium, exploring the pure Adamic language, thinking about Hebrew, thinking about Paleo Hebrew, and all this stuff. And you can see here you have like the different scripts. Essentially what happened is this is kind of like the evolution of both Hebrew, but also our Latin script or alphabet that we use. You can find these images online if you look it up, but you can see that they're essentially descended from these earlier scripts. Okay, so I did a video about that, but let's go ahead and look at Aleph. So if you look this up in Wikipedia, this is what you'll find. It has the Phoenician Aleph, the Hebrew Aleph, Aramaic Aleph, which looks like the Hebrew Aleph, Syriac Aleph, and Arabic. Okay, these are all Semitic languages. So the one that you would probably recognize after looking at this map, right? It basically just looks like a big sideways letter A, right? A big sideways letter A. And so if you were to match it up here, you'd be like, oh, well, it's the Phoenician Aleph. It doesn't look like the Hebrew Aleph. Well, hold on for just a second. So here's the Phoenician alphabet. Okay, get a good look at it. Okay, let's go over here to this article called Biblical Hebrew, and we're going to learn about how modern Hebrew came to be. So you have a table here. You have Paleo Hebrew, and you recognize, oh, okay, well that looks like the Phoenician Aleph. It's the sideways A, uppercase A. And you can see here's the bet. If you go back to the Phoenician, oh yeah, it looks like a backwards 9 kind of. So here's the bet. Look at the Gimel. Gimel, it looks like a backwards 7, or no, not a backwards 7. It looks like a regular 7. Go over here. Oh yeah, okay, that kind of looks like a 7. Oh, okay, so the Phoenician script basically looks like the Paleo Hebrew script. Okay, so let's read a little bit about this. The earliest Hebrew writing yet discovered, found in Kibberet Kayafa, dates to the 10th century before Christ. The 15 centimeter by 16.5 centimeter trapezoid pottery shard has 5 lines of text in ink written in the Proto-Canaanite alphabet, the old form which predates both the Paleo-Hebrew and Phoenician alphabets, so an even further back script. Now, what's interesting here, look at this. Okay, so we just read that this Proto-Canaanite alphabet, so this is like older, more original, and when I say that, think about potentially the Adamic language, probably by this point corrupted in different ways, but maybe in some way close, possibly. So the tablet in question is written from left to right, indicating that Hebrew writing was still in its formative stage. So that's how we write in English and pretty much all Western languages that I'm aware of. We write from left to right. Hebrew, it's backwards from us. They go from right to left. And there's the saying that, have you ever noticed that everywhere east of Israel, they write from left to right, and then everywhere west, it's right to left, as though it's like all pointing toward Israel. Um, I don't know. That's just something that I've heard before. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing. Is that an indication of how the original language was written from left to right? I don't know. But that's interesting to note. Okay, and then later it says, it seems the earlier biblical books were originally written in the Paleo Hebrew script, while the later books were written directly in the later Assyrian script. So, what is that talking about? So, it's saying that it would seem, according to this, according to scholars and academics, that originally it was written in this Paleo Hebrew, which is essentially the same as the Phoenician script. Okay, this column right here. And then later in the block or the Assyrian script, which in some cases it looks kind of similar to the Paleo Hebrew. In other cases, it's just like what? Like look at Yod. In modern Hebrew, the Assyrian script, it's just a little line that's essentially like an apostrophe, and it's up above the baseline right here. And Rabbi Gerfine has talked about this, the importance of Yod and how it's in the name of God, which for them, well, I'm not. So it's Jehovah, right? That's the Latinized name for Yahweh, and this is one of the letters in that, and it's above the baseline. So they assign a lot of significance to the actual characters of the Assyrian script, right? But here you can see in the Paleo Hebrew, it looks like a Z with a little line coming out on the left side of the Z. So they are kind of similar, some more similar than others. But anyway, so let me just read that again. So the earlier biblical books were originally written in Paleo Hebrew, while the later books were written directly in the later Assyrian script. So the earlier books of the Bible, according to scholars, it seems like that's the case. Okay, the modern Hebrew alphabet, also known as the Assyrian or square or block script, is a descendant of the Aramaic alphabet. So Aramaic, that's the language that Christ spoke, and it was like a lingua franca. But now this is according to scholars, academics. Jews would not necessarily agree with this, and I'm about to show you later on. But this is something to keep in mind. It would seem, if we're going with the scholars, that Paleo-Hebrew came first. Okay? So, again, to bring it back full circle, this letter or this symbol for Aleph, this letter in Paleo-Hebrew matches this Aleph, right? So the eclipses are not going to form an Aleph in the modern Assyrian script Hebrew. It's the ancient Paleo-Hebrew letter or symbol for Aleph. So that's kind of interesting, and that's what makes me think and wonder, is this Aleph more similar to the Adamic language than the modern Hebrew, the Assyrian script? I can't answer that question, but it's just something to think about. But let's continue. There's more. Okay, I think that's all I have from this one. Yep, that's all I have for this. Now, let's go ahead and look at Mormon doctrine, and let's start talking about the Adamic language. Okay, so we're looking at Mormon doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie. Okay, under his entry for Adamic language. In the beginning, God gave Adam a language that was pure, perfect, and undefiled. This Adamic language, now unknown, was far superior to any language which is presently extant. Now, Jews would disagree with this because they believe that Hebrew has essentially remained undefiled all the way back to Adam, in that Hebrew, as we know it now, was the language that God used to speak the world into existence, which, again, that's not really, well, it's not part of our doctrine. It's not necessarily against our doctrine, but in our church, we don't have the idea that God literally spoke words in order to create the world. Although you could see that that could obviously be the case. It's just something that in our church, that knowledge has not been restored or has not been revealed yet. So it's plausible. I don't know. But what we do know is that if that was the case, then God would have been using this, most likely this pure Adamic language. But Bruce R. McConkie says more. This Adamic language, now unknown, was far superior to any tongue which is presently extant. For example, the name of God the Father in this original language is man of holiness, signifying that he is a holy man and not a vague essence. So, in the undefiled language, it was pretty clear who and what God was, not a vague spiritual essence. And of course, in our church, we believe that he is a man. He's a glorified celestial man, right? The first language spoken by mortals was either the celestial tongue of the gods or such adaptation of it as was necessary to meet the limitations of mortality. And Adam and his posterity had power to speak, read, and write it. So, in other words, what we may have received was what our bodies or our fallen state could handle of the pure language. He's not saying that for sure. He's saying that it was either the celestial tongue of the gods or such adaptation of it as was necessary. So it could actually be the language of heaven. It could be. Or it may have had to have been adapted as was necessary. In writing of the saints in the days of the first man, Moses says, quote, "And a book of remembrance was kept in the language of Adam, for it was given unto as many as called upon God to write by the spirit of inspiration. And by them their children were taught to read and write, having a language which was pure and undefiled." That's from Moses chapter 6, verses 5 through 6. The beauty and power of this Adamic language is indicated by a statement made by Moroni to the Lord about the brother of Jared, who spoke the original and pure language. Because remember, the language of the Jaredites, or at least in the beginning, was not defiled at the time of Babel. So, Ether 12, verse 24, thou madest him that the things which he wrote were mighty, even as thou art, unto the overpowering of man to read them. During the millennium, it appears that men will again have power to speak and write the Adamic language, which I'm looking forward to that day, because English is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. The English script does not match the way that things are pronounced, for one, and there's all sorts of problems. I don't know what the pure Adamic language is going to be like, but I would think that a perfect language, you wouldn't have um, multiple words with different meanings spelled different ways, pronounced the same. For example, there, and there. Those are three different words in the English language. And the only way that you can know that they're different words is if you see how they're spelt, or if you're listening to the conversation in which they're being used and you hear the context of how that word is being used. That's the only way you can know. And I feel like it shouldn't be that way. When you say a word, you should know just based off of the sound of it, oh, that is exactly what that person is saying, right? Because there, you have the THEIR there. You have the THEY''RE there, like they are. And then you have THERE, which is there, like that person is over there, that place over there. It's silly. It's ridiculous. Okay, so anyway, of that day, the Lord says he will, quote, turn to the people a pure language, that they may that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. From Zephaniah 3:9. In some instances, when the saints speak in tongues, the language impressed upon them by the power of the Spirit is the pure Adamic language. That's an interesting thought. Again, I've wondered time and time again, what is the purpose of speaking in tongues? We know that you can have the gift of tongues, which has a practical application uh, in the case of missionaries who are going to a foreign speaking country. Sometimes they need additional help in order to communicate the gospel message. Other times, though, and this is doctrine in our church, and my understanding, if I remember right, this happened at the Kirtland Temple. There is this speaking in tongues where you stand up and you start speaking it or whatever. So again, he says here, in some instances, when the saints speak in tongues, the language impressed upon them by the power of the Spirit is the pure Adamic language or Adamic tongue. Now, I don't know what the purpose would be of doing that, like what that accomplishes. So, like, say that you're at Kirtland and the temple's being dedicated, and then you start speaking in the Adamic tongue. Who are you talking to? What are you relaying? Why are you speaking in a different tongue? I don't know. I don't know the answer to this, but if you're speaking in the pure Adamic tongue, then maybe what's necessary is very precise, very pure language. But I have absolutely no idea. If you have any insights into this, please let me know, because that's always been a mystery to me. Okay, so the Aleph, going over the United States in the Phoenician or Paleo Hebrew script. Is this actually a letter from the pure Adamic language, or is this kind of like a variation? Maybe in the pure Adamic language, the Aleph is a little bit different. Who knows? I don't know. But could it be? Maybe. Uh, so we're talking about Paleo Hebrew here. So you might think, well, the only people whose language was not defiled was the Jaredites, right? So let's take a look at a few things, okay? let's try and answer that question. Like, would the Lord use a letter from a defiled language to put over the United States, when it would seem that only the Jaredites remained with an undefiled language? Well, let's look at that. So in Ether 1, starting in verse 33, it says, "Which Jared came forth with his brother and their families, with some others and their families, from the great tower, at the time of the Lord, confounded the language of the people, and swore in his wrath that they should be scattered upon all the face of the earth. And according to the word of the Lord, the people were scattered. And the brother of Jared, being a large and mighty man, and a man highly favored of the Lord, Jared his brother said unto him, Cry unto the Lord, that he will not confound us, that we may not understand our words. And it came to pass that the brother of Jared did cry unto the Lord, and the Lord had compassion upon Jared. Therefore he did not confound the language of Jared, and Jared and his brother were not confounded. Then Jared said unto his brother, Cry again unto the Lord, and it may be that we will turn away his anger from them who are our friends, that he confound not their language. And it came to pass that the brother of Jared did cry unto the Lord, and the Lord had compassion upon their friends and their families also, that they were not confounded. Okay, so the language of the Jaredites, Jared, his brother, their friends, their family was not corrupted. Later on in the next chapter, a very interesting thing in verse 3, and they did also carry with them Deseret, which by interpretation is honeybee, and thus they did carry with them swarms of bees. Now, what's interesting about Deseret is that it would seem, it doesn't explicitly say it, but it would seem that since their language was not confounded, that this is one of the pure Adamic language words, or one of the words from the pure Adamic language. Unless, from the time of Adam to Jared, if there had been some changes, variations, dialects, corruptions of any sort, then maybe that's the case. But the text would seem to imply that the language was still intact, or it was still pure. I don't know. So, but if it was, then this may be one of the only words that we have from that language. The only other one that I would know of, or a couple words actually, would be Adam, Ondai, Amen. So these are like the only like 4 words that I'm aware of that come from the original Adamic language: Deseret, Adam, Ondai, Amen. So it's weird. It's interesting. So that just reminded me, and I've known about this for a long time. I'm sure that many of you, this is nothing new. But the word Deseret, they've actually looked into it, and it does seem to match up with an ancient term from Egypt. So let me just read what it says here. Latter-day Saint scholar Hugh Nibley, extending the work of Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner, suggested an etymology by associating the word Deseret with the ancient Egyptian Desert. Like, the Egyptians didn't use. I don't know why he wrote it like this, but I guess in Egyptian script, it's like, it's kind of like Hebrew, where they don't have like vowels. You have to like know what the vowels are. Which okay, well, why, I don't know. But anyway, desert, a term referring to the quote unquote B crown of the lower kingdom. And when you click on B crown, it takes you to this right here. And hopefully you recognize this. This is like the lower part of like the crown that Pharaoh wore. It represents the lower kingdom, and then you have the upper kingdom, which was like a white bulb cone head looking thing. So anyway, that's kind of interesting, right? And so the point here is, if the Egyptians used the word Deseret to refer to this, then it may mean that the Egyptians, those at that very early time in human history, had some of those original words, but at that time had been possibly changed a bit or used to apply to different things. I don't know. But you can see how the pure Adamic language may still kind of be with us today, albeit in corrupted form. You get what I'm saying? So, as we're thinking about the Jews, and as we're thinking about the Phoenician script and the Paleo Hebrew script, it is plausible that these are very similar to the original Adamic language. This might, who knows, this might be the closest thing that we have to the pure Adamic language. So, in a sense, the Jews could be right. In a sense, I'm going to show you what they believe in just a minute, according to Chabad.org. But before we get to that, there's a couple other things that we need to look at. What's interesting is in the Book of Mormon videos, the Book of Mormon video series that they've recently done, when you look at the Liahona, you'll notice that what they have here is the Paleo Hebrew script on the inside here. Of course, this is an artist or a set designer or whatever. This is their interpretation of how it would look like. I don't know how much input they received from the brethren as far as like set design and props and stuff like that. Maybe some, maybe none at all. If you know, please let me know. But at some point, somebody made the choice to use Paleo Hebrew for the Liahona, which I think is pretty interesting. And I think I want to. Never mind. Now, one thing to think about, though, is that any church publication, whether it's videos like this or manuals or magazines or whatever, they all go through the correlation process. There's a correlation committee that goes through to make sure that everything's doctrinally correct. Now, them using the Paleo Hebrew script, it may not really be a doctrinal thing. They may just been, yeah, let's just put that because according to scholarship, this is probably um, the Hebrew script that was being used at the time, the Paleo Hebrew. So it may be just nothing more than that. But there is the potential that maybe through the correlation process, they were like, no, we need to use Paleo Hebrew. I don't know, but I just thought that was an interesting little detail. I'm bringing this up because I used this image for my thumbnail for this video, Jewish description of Urim and Thummim operation. Like they have an idea of like how the Urim and Thummim actually operated, which is interesting because it seems very similar to how the Liahona operated. You should watch this video if you haven't. Not a whole lot of people watch this one for some reason, but it's really, really interesting. So I'll put that in the description below. Now, before we move on to Jews and how they view the current Assyrian script and the Paleo Hebrew script, there's one last thing I want to look at, and this is actually by Hugh Nibley. This article that I'm looking at, this was put together by the Interpreter Foundation. I love these guys. They do such really good, solid work. And this is an article by Jeff M. Bradshaw called "What Was the Confusion About the Tower of Babel?" So you go down here, and they quote Hugh Nibley and then say a few things. Okay, what seemed to be God's most important concerns about the confusion at Babel, or Babel, I don't know. Hugh Nibley argues that the confusion, or mixing up, of language is necessarily connected to the confusion, or mingling, of the covenant people with their unbelieving neighbors. So this is like a recurring theme, particularly I would say in the Old Testament, that there should not be intermarriage between you and people of other faiths, and there is a reason for that. It's still a standard today because the goal, what we're trying to do, is to turn you into somebody that after this life you'll achieve the most that you possibly can and rise up to the level of our Heavenly Father. And our Heavenly Father is in a celestial marriage. And that's how you obtain the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, is the new and everlasting covenant of eternal marriage. Right? And so when we're talking about, and I've done a video about this as well a long time ago, about, let me just look it up. Might as well. I did a video a long time ago about the Watchers, the Nephilim. This is like one of those mystery things that people like to be like, oh, were these aliens? Were they fallen angels? Let's see. I'm just gonna do search for Watchers. Okay, yeah. I did this video called The Watchers, the Fallen Ones, the Nephilim, the Sons of God. And people will take this concept, they'll look at the book of Enoch and be like, oh, the Watchers are coming back before the second coming. You don't even know. No, no, they're not aliens. They're not resurrected beings from some other place. The whole concept in Genesis, when it's talking about the sons of God taking the daughters of men, it has to do with intermarriage. It has to do with people that are of the covenant marrying worldly people, and then therefore um, introducing that corruption into their future generations. That's it. That's all that there is. In fact, in my members only, I'm making videos for that again. My newest video is a new quote that I found from John Taylor talking about this very thing. It has to do with intermarriage and corruption. So, okay, so let's go back to here. Connected to the confusion mingling of the covenant people with their unbelieving neighbors, a phenomenon that the Lord condemns elsewhere in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Though we should remember that textual and interpretive difficulties present in the version of Genesis on the brass plates of Laban could have made their way into Moroni's summary of the story of Babel, the Book of Mormon provides some helpful perspectives on the confusion of languages and people. For example, while warning that, quote, we need to be cautious of simplistic readings of the scriptural text, end quote, Hugh Nibley provided this careful analysis of the Jaredite story. Yes, I totally agree with that. Simplistic readings. Now, you guys, we're all at different levels. We're all at different levels. Some have gone to college, some have not. Some, regardless of whether you went to college, some are more acute, maybe better read than others. We're all at different levels. But what applies to all of us is that you should not just like simplistically read things. You really need to study. And you need to stick to authoritative sources. First, you should see what the church says about scriptures. And they have talked about all of them. There really shouldn't be any confusion, really. But anyway, let's just continue. So this is this is now by Hugh Nibley. He says, the Book of Ether, depicting the uprooting and scattering from the tower of a numerous population, shows them going forth in family groups and groups of friends and associates. There was no point in having Jared's language unconfounded if there was no one he could talk to. And his brother cried to the Lord that his friends might also retain the language. The same, however, would apply to any other language. If every individual were to speak a tongue all his own, and so go off entirely by himself, the races would have been not merely scattered, but quite annihilated. We must not fall into the old vice of reading into the scripture things that are not there. There is nothing said in our text about every man suddenly speaking a new language. Yeah, this is a big problem. Reading into the scriptures things that are not there. That happen. I come across that so much, and it's really frustrating. We are told in the Book of Ether that languages were confounded with and by the quote-unquote confounding of the people. Cry unto the Lord, says Jared, that he will not confound us, that we may not understand our words. The statement is significant for more than one thing. How can it possibly be said that we may not understand our words? Words we cannot understand may be nonsense syllables or may be in some foreign language, but in either case, they are not our words. The only way we can fail to understand our own words is to have words that are actually ours change their meaning among us. That is exactly what happens when people, and hence languages, are either confounded, that is, mixed up or scattered. Ether's account in Ether's account, the confounding of people is not to be separated from the confounding of their languages. They are and have always been one in the same process. The Lord, we are told, did not confound the language of Jared, and Jared and his brother were not confounded, and the Lord had compassion upon their friends and their families also, that they were not confounded. That confound, quote unquote, as used in the book of Ether, is meant to have its true and proper meaning of to pour together, to mix up together, is clear from the prophecy in Ether 13:8 that the remnant of the house of Joseph shall be built upon this land, and they shall no more be confounded. The word here meaning mixed up with other people, culturally, linguistically, or otherwise. So it's just a long way of saying, corrupting ideas, corrupting words, just like what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. And there's a corruption of our language right now as people, secret combinations, powers that be, wicked people seek to defile language, to weaponize language, and force you to speak the language that they want you to speak. That's happening right now. It's almost unbearable, frankly. And so when we go back here and we see what is potentially the original Aleph, it could be, it may not, but the original Alpha, because Alpha and Omega, those are the Greek letters, but the original, when you think of Alpha and Omega, you think of an alphabet from beginning to end. And so Aleph would be the first letter in Paleo Hebrew, in Phoenician, and in Assyrian Hebrew script. It's the first letter. So yes, I agree, or I could see how the Jews believe when they're thinking, because I was just talking about this with Rabbi Gerfein, how the letter Aleph is the first. It's like the closest to God. It's the beginning. Um, the whole thing about the three lines representing the Trinity, that's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if that is actually true. It's not our doctrine, obviously, but it very well could be. It's either something that hasn't been restored yet or hasn't been revealed, but this definitely could mean that. But this could definitely represent also um, both the corruption of our language, the way things are just going so insane. Everybody is descending further and further into delusion, and that's creeping into our language and being inserted into our language. And this, at the same time, could represent a restoration of that pure language, pure ideas, pure words, pure reality, in contrast to delusion. So this symbol right here, if it is indeed a symbol, we don't even know necessarily, but if it is, there are many different things that this could represent. It could represent the return of Aleph, Christ. He is Alpha and Omega. So the corruption of language. Now, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to watch this video. It's called As Below, So Above by James Lindsay. I've recommended this before in another video, but essentially he's at this kind of conference where they're talking about, well, they're essentially talking about secret combinations and the secret mysticisms, the secret religions, the secret belief systems that are being imposed on the world. And he specifically talks about Gnosticism and Hermeticism. If you have spent any amount of time looking into secret combinations, uh, there's all these different, conspiracies out there. And there was like a really intense time, I would say, a very intense few years where a lot of people were getting very interested in these things. And I'm sure that many of you have. And it shouldn't take you very long before you start coming across um, these different theories talking about Hermeticism and Gnosticism. And they're very, well, especially in the case of Gnosticism, not so much Hermeticism, but yes, Hermeticism too, in some cases. It's very corrupt and it's very backwards. In fact, Gnosticism, it's very backwards. Um, just to give you a little taste, Gnosticism is more like religious in nature, like it has like a creation myth. Um, and there were Jewish Gnostics, there were Christian Gnostics, but essentially they inverted everything. Like they'll look at, for example, they'll look at the Garden of Eve, the Garden of Eve, the Garden of Eden story, and they'll say that the serpent was actually a good guy, that this world was not supposed to be created. It was a big mistake, in that you are enslaved here, and the serpent is actually trying to help you to find yourself, for you to save yourself, and you become your own savior, essentially. That's a very, 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 very simplistic view of it. There's like a whole mythology to it. The original God created another God. I want to say that her name is Sophia, and she in turn wanted to create another God, and then that God became the God of this world and created the earth, but it was an imperfect God, and essentially like a tyrant and a dictator wanting to keep you down and keep you enslaved. And uh, you know, he didn't want Adam and Eve to have the same knowledge, and so the serpent was actually a good guy trying to help, trying to hint to us how we can escape. It's very backwards and it's very bad, but I would encourage you to watch this. It's a little bit on the longer side. It's an hour and 41 minutes, but it's very good. It's very good, and he talks a lot about the corruption of language and the methods that they use to try and enforce or affect change, the change that they're looking for in the world, the paradise that they want to set up, and how when you boil it all down, it's just basically brainwashing methods. And as I was watching this, and as I've thought about it before, I was just thinking this is essentially the philosophies and religion of narcissists. Narcissists are all about manipulation, coercion, trickery, gaslighting, forcing, making everybody fall in line. That's what, and he talks a lot about communism because communism is a big part of that. So I would encourage you to watch this because he talks a lot about the corruption of language, but especially like toward the end part. That's when he starts like really talking about language and stuff. So, okay, now let's go ahead and look really quick at what how Jews view Hebrew and how they view the two scripts, the Paleo Hebrew and the Assyrian script. So this is from Chabad. It's essentially a reach out organization to Jews to try and bring them back into the fold. Jews that have become secular or distance themselves from, um, religious life. So on this article, it says, question: I recently read about some ancient writings that were in a script called Proto-Hebrew, or that's Paleo Hebrew, which the Jews supposedly used to write in before the current Hebrew script. What's up with that? Which is the authentic ancient Hebrew alphabet, and in what script was the original Torah written in? Now, this would be a very important question to you if you were a Jew, because as you started to get more in touch with your Jewish roots and beliefs, you would know that letters are very important in Judaism, like the actual letters, because of the way that they're drawn. There's different beliefs that come out of how the letters are written, as in like the lines. Like I was talking about the yod before, and how it's the only letter that's above the plane or the line on which you write the letters. They assign special meaning to that. So if you have this Paleo Hebrew that came before and it doesn't match up, then it's like, well, why were they even using that? If the Hebrew that we're using right now has all this special meaning in the letters, well, how could that be if there was a Hebrew before that? Because then that would seem to just go in accordance with um, academia, scholarship, saying, well, it was just a progression of things. No, this Hebrew script that you use right now, it does not go all the way back to God and Adam and stuff like that. Well, okay, so you can see why that would be a big question for a Jew. Okay, the reply. Indeed, there are two scripts. One is Kitav Ivli, the Hebrew script, also called Phoenician or Proto or Paleo Hebrew. This is the quote unquote alternative from the ancient Hebrew alphabet you have discovered. This script was still widely used during the age of the Mishnah. So that was like the time, just shortly after the time of Christ, when they took the oral law and wrote it down as the Mishnah because they knew that they were going into a large exile after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and was well known to the sages. The other script, Kitav Ashulit, or the Assyrian script, is the one we know today as the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, so they acknowledge that there are the two scripts, but they stick to the idea that the Assyrian script is the original, in that the Hebrew script, or the Katav Ivli, or the Paleo Hebrew, was an alternative. Okay. And then it goes on to say, while this may be a fascinating revelation for some, your question regarding the script the Torah was written in is not a new one. In fact, the Talmud itself discusses this very question and gives three opinions. Opinion number one, Mar Zutra, some say Mar Ukva, said, quote, originally the Torah was given to Israel in Ivli letters and in the sacred Hebrew language. Later, in the times of Ezra, the Torah was given in Ashorit, or the Assyrian script, the one that they use right now, and the Aramaic language. Finally, they selected for Israel the Ashorit script and the Hebrew language, leaving the Ivli characters and the Aramaic language for the commoners. Who are the commoners? Rav Chisda said the Samaritans, that is Kitav Ivli. Rav Chisda said Libanoa script, the ancient Hebrew. So to summarize that, it's like, okay, so originally, yes, it was written in Paleo Hebrew, but later, in the times of Ezra, it was put in the Assyrian script, the one that they use today, and then they left the original, or the Paleo Hebrew, to the Samaritans. Okay, so that's what that opinion says. The second opinion is this. It was taught, Rebbe said, quote, Torah was originally given to Israel in Ashorit. So that's the script that they use today. When they sinned, it was changed to Rolitz, or Lolitz, Ivli script. When they repented, Ashorit script was reintroduced. So he's saying that at first it was given in the Hebrew, the modern Hebrew script, but then they sinned and it went to Paleo Hebrew, and then when they repented, it was brought back to the current Hebrew script that they use today. Okay, in the third opinion, R. Shimon ben Elazar said in the name of R. Eliezer ben Parta, who said in the name of R. Elazar Hamadai, this writing was never changed. It was always the Ashorit script. So this one rejects the whole Paleo Hebrew altogether. So, and from what I've seen, that's typically the case with a lot of aspects of Judaism, is that when you go to like the Talmud for answers of things, there's always like these different opinions of different rabbis, and you're kind of left like not really knowing what the right answer is. But it seems to me that there usually comes to be like a popular opinion that most people go with, but they still leave the other opinions of the ancient sages in the Talmud. All right, and then over here, I just wanted to read one more thing. The letters and the words they form are holy, talking about the Hebrew script, the modern one, with layers of meaning from the literal to the mystical. It was pronounced by God when the Jews received the Torah at Sinai, and it is read from the Torah by Jews all over the world. The Hebrew letters are precise. Every letter and every vowel has a distinct pronunciation. Though some of these distinctions were lost to some communities over the years, they were preserved by other communities. And then it shows you our current Hebrew script that you would see when you go to Israel. I'm not aware of like anywhere in Israel where they would be using Paleo Hebrew anywhere. So this is what you would be using. So this, I don't know if it means to say, because it says here it was pronounced by God when Jews received Torah at Sinai. I don't think that he's meaning that that's where it was first introduced, because based on what I've talked about with Rabbi Gerfine, he makes it seem like they believe that this right here was around from the very beginning. So, but anyway, make of that what you will. He may just be giving examples here, like it was given by God at Torah, at Sinai, and it's read by Jews all over the world when they read Torah. All right. Here's just like a different style or font, and another one, and another one. This is Hebrew cursive, and as I've tried to learn Hebrew, I find this confusing, but obviously it would just kind of take time. Some of these don't even I don't know how they came to this conclusion based on how the characters actually are. So, um, as far as like Jewish opinion goes, it seems like the prevailing opinion is that this script has always been. So they would tend to be like, no, this is the original script. These are the actual letters that God used, and this is the writing that He would have used for all these various things. Whereas scholarship and academics would say that no, this came first, Paleo Hebrew, and then later you got the block or the modern Hebrew letters. So very long way of saying, if the original Adamic language and its script survived, if parts of it survived after the flood, it's plausible that modern day Hebrew, but more especially probably Paleo Hebrew, may be the closest thing that resembles the original Adamic language. And so it could be that the Aleph may actually be the undefiled Adamic Aleph, or it may be something similar. And that's what's being written with these uh, eclipses and their paths of totality. And that's being written over the United States. So, corruption of language, which we're seeing today, as they're trying to distort meanings and words, and they're using words and phrases as tools and weapons in order to enact what they want the world to be. And so, therefore, the original Aleph going over the United States might be just the perfect symbol to correct everything, reintroducing the correct language, and also representing the Godhead, potentially representing Christ as Aleph or Alpha, right? There's no Omega here, but Alpha and Omega. And it's really interesting, and you cannot ignore the fact that all three of these are significant to the church as far as like them going over significant church sites, especially the 2017 and 2024. But you could also say the 2023, the one coming up in October, which goes through Utah, and then it also goes through Corpus Christi. A big thing that we're going to see when Christ comes is the resurrection. We're going to see Him in His resurrected body, and then we're going to see all the righteous that are resurrected at that time. And the resurrection is going to continue throughout the millennium, and then even after the millennium, when it's time for the telestials to be resurrected at the end of the 1,000 years. So I find significance in this, and I feel like this is a pretty good theory. It's not something that you can really say for sure, but it's certainly interesting at the very least. Um, God, I don't believe he does anything whatsoever arbitrarily. I think that we'll probably be very surprised after this life, or maybe even in the millennium, to find how much order there was in everything. Everything from looking at the map in the way that the world is laid out. Everything from that to storms, hurricanes, um, different things in nature. We know that the planets, the stars, they have significance. And I wouldn't be surprised that just every single thing does have significance, although the vast majority of it we can't comprehend at this time. But maybe at some future time we'll be able to read it all. You know, if you were able to like come back as a visitor, you know, to Earth as like if you were able to basically time travel and come back and just kind of be a secret observer watching things, maybe at some future time when we have that knowledge, you'd be able to do that, come back and be like, oh my gosh, everything is written everywhere. There's the order everywhere. Now I know how to read it. So I think that we would do well to keep an eye on these eclipses. So the next one is in just a couple months. We're about 3 months away from the one in October. Don't know if anything will happen on that day. Don't know if anything will happen after. Don't know if we have to wait till 2024. Don't even know if these. Well, I would say that they would definitely be signs, but I recently did a video about signs if they always have to do with something in the future, which they don't. Sometimes they are something that signifies something that's currently happening as the sign is happening. So maybe something will happen on those days, maybe not. Or they may be something for future generations to look back at as a sign and be like, oh, yep. So, yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. Yeah. And then just a reminder, here's that book that you can order if you'd like. $10 off with code Christian. Just go to the description below and you'll find the link for it. Okay, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.